Morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you can all hear me. And a very warm welcome to Groundswell 2023. I recognise a few faces from this session last year, so thank you for joining us and preferring this over the high rollers in the big tent. So thank you very much indeed. What we're going to do this morning, I'm going to introduce our speakers, and they're going to give us a sort of 6 to 7 minute introduction to their farming businesses, where they are on their journey of regenerative farming. And then what I'd like to do is Dave, who's up behind us, he's going to be wandering around with a roving mic, and we want to have lots of questions after the speakers have spoken, and anything goes. So we want to unearth the bits that have gone well, the bits that have gone badly, challenges you faced along the way, hurdles that you didn't expect, and but also, if I may ask that when if you put your hand up, and Dave will bring you the microphone, and if you can introduce yourself and wait for the mic, because the Cherries have asked that we record the event, and unless you've got a microphone, it won't get recorded. So first of all, we've got Dougal Hosford, who's going to speak to you about his farming business, and then after that, Julian, and then finally Guy Halsey. So Dougal, over to you.
Am I live? Yeah. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to have a chance to talk to so many people. I farm down in Dorset, on the hills of Dorset, where we've got plenty of flints and plenty of chalk, just outside Blandford. I'm a tenant farmer, second generation. I farm with my brother, have done my whole working life, and we've now got my son back on the farm, Fred, who's here. If in case I get in trouble, he can answer the questions. We're predominantly arable, 540 hectares of arable. We're a total of 800 hectares. 540 is in arable cropping at the moment. We've got 20 hectares of herbal ley, 150 hectares of arable is in countryside stewardship, and we've got roughly 90 hectares of steep permanent pasture. It's rolling Dorset downland. Pretty standard. We've been winter wheat, oilseed rape, Maris otter, winter barley, spring barley, beans, and we're just venturing into some wild farmed milling wheat and some wild farmed by-crop of beans and wheat, which I'll elaborate on in a minute. We've always liked growing funny things, and we have grown borage, linseed, sunflowers and poppies in the past, which have all had their problems. We've got 70 suckler cows to graze the permanent pasture and the herbal leys. And we've always saved as much seed as possible, and as time goes on, we're very keen to save every seed that we plant on our farm. We now don't treat any seed. We used to get it tested and treated if it needed it, but we're not now going to use any. We don't want any fungicide to be going in the soil. So a rough timeline of our travel into stewardship. We started min-tilling in 2000 roughly. We haven't ploughed anything since then. Ploughing on our flints is far too expensive. And then other reasons that have influenced me in going down this sort of route is probably one subconscious one, is that my mother was a very keen botanist and wildlife person, and I think as I get older that comes out. I started growing no-dig vegetables in the garden 15 or 20 years ago, and I absolutely love it, and I realise how good the food is, and really I want to try and get that going on the rest of the farm if we can, the production of healthy food. Another thing is that my whole family are all looking at different ways to grow and distribute food, so that's giving us a good prompting. But since we've gone into stewardship, it's taught us that it is possible to grow funny crops. We've got a lot of 6 metre margins and bird food that we had to learn how to plant, and that has sort of helped get me thinking about what else we can do differently in our mainline crops. I've also read a lot of the regen books, and the more we get into it, the more sense all the books I've read make, and all the stuff that I've learned at Groundswell make. It just seems to make sense. So it needs pursuing. The old protocol of spraying everything by the book until it's within an inch of its life, it's just got boring, and we want to try and do without sprays and fertilizers as much as we possibly can. And the results on the farm since we've been in stewardship are just amazing to see. When I look in the soil behind the drill, there's always something alive in there. There's lots of creepy crawlies, there's loads of worms, and it's just really good to see. And we're managing to get our corn bunting back, which are the birds on the right-hand side of the screen. We've managed to reduce our use of nitrogen by about 40%, and that has led us to be able to use much less fungicide on our crops as well. How am I doing for time? Right. So a summary of our stewardship is that we have 74 hectares of flower-rich margins and plots. We've been in stewardship for nearly 15 years, and we've just gone into another countryside stewardship last year, which we've enhanced quite a lot. And we're trying to get it fully integrated into our farming system so that it works for us and it works for the wildlife. And an example of this is that with our flower-rich margins, they need cutting every year or every other year, and we do it in rotation really. And so the proceeds of the cutting we make into hay, and we feed our suckler cows in the winter, and that works really well. And we're now getting into compost making, and the aim is that we don't feed to our cows, we are going to use for compost. And 74 hectares of flower-rich margin is quite a lot. Every single field on the farm, arable field, now has a flower-rich margin around it. We've experimented with some 2-year legume fallow, which is proving we're not quite sure whether we like it. It's complicated the system a bit because we've put 12 metres round all the fields that are going into that went into spring crops as a cultural method of controlling brome. But it just seems to complicate things, splitting up a field yet again. The herbal lay we mob graze with our cows, and the rest on there is pretty self-explanatory, but it does come to quite a horrifyingly large amount when you're trying to work out where you're supposed to be producing the grain. That's an example of some of our floristic margins, and a nice hedge with a margin either side, which is just perfect. As I say, we're trying to grow all our own seeds, so we've started growing our own cover crop seeds, which has actually proved to be easier than we thought. So we've got Phacelia buckwheat, vetch, camelina, and we just harvested the turnip seed yesterday, which is rather exciting. And then the other thing I did was harvest some downland. We got some lovely downland, and I've drilled that in some of our new AB8 margins, which was quite a game, but if it works, we're going to have native seed growing in our margins rather than purchased seed, which for me is just going to be amazing if it works. That's just a view of the farm and some cover crop. There's some cover crop on there that we left and then harvested that the following summer. And if you want a really special environment for the wildlife, that mixed cover crop, 12 species cover crop in the summer is the most amazing thing to see. And then we harvested it whole, and we've drilled it as catch crop after spring barley before winter barley. It's pretty cost effective. So we graze our cover crops with our cattle in the winter, which can pose a few problems because if it gets wet, we mob graze, as I said, the cows in the summer, and winter and summer we move the cows every day because we feel that's the best way. Just to sum up the challenges, that is our stewardship map. You can't really see it, but all it tells you is it's bloody complicated. If I get an inspection, then I'm definitely going away for a week because that is impossible. There's a picture of our wheat grown after herbal ley there, which we direct drilled the wheat into the herbal ley, and we had a lovely bycrop of lucerne and wheat, which actually harvested nicely, and then we had a fantastic cover crop of lucerne afterwards, so it wasn't all bad. Poaching the cover crops with the cows is a problem when it comes to winter drilling, spring drilling, sorry. And then what's the future going to be? Well, it's definitely in Dorset is grass-reared beef for me, Aberdeen Angus cross. We're trying to grow wild farm wheat and bicrops. The bicrop on the right is wheat and beans with no inputs other than 80 kilograms of nitrogen. And I think that'll be enough.
Dougal, thank you very much indeed. I think that's what you're doing down in Blandford is an extraordinary example of what the possible is, integrating livestock. I, for one, I think anyone that can grow a floristic margin without problems is obviously a couple of tiers above me in terms of ability. But I'd like to come back to you about what you're doing with Wild Farmed in a minute and talk about how you're going about saving some of your cover crop mixes as well. But thank you very much indeed, Dougal. Julian Madeley. Julian farms in South Shropshire near Ludlow. And Julian, perhaps you can tell us about your journey thus far. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. I think I've got some slides coming as well. Yeah, so we farm in a very beautiful area. It's the South Shropshire Hills area of outstanding natural beauty. So we've got 200 hectares of arable crops at Eaton Manor. So soil is 48% clay over limestone aquifer. So it's a very old lake bed that we're farming, and it's a lake bed on top of an aquifer. There's a fault line that runs through it called the Wenlock Edge. So we've got lots of water appearing in lots of places all over the farm. 180 metres above sea level, and plenty of rainfall as well, 800 mil. Now, interestingly, our two driest months are February and March, and two of our wettest months are August and October. So no problem growing things, challenges to harvest things and challenges to establish things. And that's probably where one of the reasons we started our regen journey was how do we make the soil more resilient, and how do we sort of have those work windows larger. And I guess also we had a similar thing that the gardens at Eaton Manor are no dig, and we're seeing really great results there. I'm just thinking, okay, we must be doing the rest of the farm wrong then, because we're getting better soil resilience and nicer structure in the gardens than we are on the farm. So therefore we must have been doing something wrong. Where we started, so all of these things are about family farms. About 30 years ago, we're thinking, right, we've got more generations coming, only a relatively small farm, what do we do? So we decided to diversify. Mum and Dad did residential properties, my sister holiday lets and events, and I've created a communications and conferencing business. So I'm now a very hands-off farmer, and so how do I go on the regenerative journey without being on the farm every single day and without doing everything myself? So that's created some challenges. So part of what we did on our journey 30 years ago, we were at wall-to-wall winter wheat. We had 25 years of continuous wheat, and so we were definitely sinners as I look at it from today's point of view then. Got lots of challenges that you might expect. The soil was getting more and more difficult to cultivate. Getting seed beds was very difficult, taking more and more power. And we're also getting plenty of grass weeds and some nasty ones at that. So what we've done so far, much wider variety of crops. So that's I think that's last summer. So we've got sort of the cash crops would be oilseed rape and wheat and barley. We're also growing beans. We've got AB15 and a bit like yourself, I'm not exactly sure whether AB15's going to be for us in the long term. Ryegrass and red clover mix we've had as well. So much more wider diversity, and then some cover crops we've been trying to get sheep back in there onto the cover crops. We have no livestock ourselves, but we're in a very heavy livestock area, so access to livestock is very simple. Another thing we've been doing is just try to stop disturbing the soil as much. So thinking about the no dig in the gardens, much lower soil disturbance. So this is last autumn we drilled winter wheat direct into a 5-year grass and clover lay, and much to the amazement of our neighbours, it actually grew. and we've got a reasonably decent crop of wheat there. The eagle eyes will see the black grass in there, a little bit of black grass. Last time we put wheat in there, it looked like a bycrop of black grass. It was horrible, and so it's gone from utterly horrible to fairly acceptable now. So, and what I knew I didn't want to do, I didn't want to turn that soil over. I knew that, and so obviously don't know the yield. It's not going to be our best one, but I think it's an awful lot better than it was before we started a much stronger rotation. Challenges along the way. Say I'm sort of hands off, and so how do you take the team on the journey from everybody being pretty downhearted about change and pretty worried about change? How do you take them on that journey to being really happy about it? And one of the things I see at Groundswell is most people are pretty happy. It's a happy place to be, and how do we get the team into the happy place? Other challenges, we've become fantastically good at producing slugs. I don't actually know why. Hopefully there's some people here who can tell me why, but we've got really good at that, which is a shame. And the other part of the slide is blank, because that's the other challenge we've found with these small seeds, and we've grown nothing. It's the first time we've ever had complete crop failures in some of the new crops, so that's been fairly challenging as well, particularly when you go back to trying to take people on that journey from anxious to happy, and you end up with slugs and crop failures. But we're getting there, and we're learning. And benefits, this is a field margin, really nasty, wet normally. I don't think I've grown anything there before, and now we're growing things. So our headlands are getting a lot less traffic. We're not disturbing the soil as much, and suddenly we're growing crops in places of the farm where we weren't growing crops before. So that's a benefit. We're not as far as Dougal down the line, but we're probably about 20-25% reduction in diesel and fertiliser and chemical across the farm. We still use too many inputs, I'm certain of that. And my worry and my challenge is how do we make sure we're not peeling an onion? How is it that we take inputs away without just reducing yield? So that's sort of my personal worry and challenge and reason that I'm here at Groundswell. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the challenges you speak of won't be foreign to all of us, slugs especially. Our final speaker is Guy Halsey. Guy farms just near Berkhamsted, and is going to give us an introduction into his journey thus far.
Right, my regenerative journey. So as Ian said, we're in the Chilterns. We are heavy silty clay with flints. Every field has a wood on one side of it, or on part of one side of it. We're quite high. It's cold and wet and late. We haven't got any land drains. We haven't got any ditches. It is good wheatland. It's good, strong wheatland. It's much less good at growing anything else. And it does wear lots of metal rubber and back windows. Half the farm, in area terms, has establishment of 60% or lower, and about 2/3 of it is at 65% or lower. So it's I guess pretty sticky, wet clay. But we've got really good worm numbers. We've got lots of every type of worm, and particularly after lays, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then our wheat yields generally are in the sort of 9 to 11 ton. I'd love to say they're 11 tons more than they are 9 tons, but that's not true. And we are, obviously hoping to sort of continue maintaining good wheat yields, but with a general reduction in other expenditure, I guess. So this is us, sort of ring fenced. That is sort of flatter and wet, and that is hillier and slightly less wet. There's lots of grass in there, as you can see. We sadly don't have any livestock of our own anymore. We used to have a dairy herd and beef herds. We do have other people's livestock now, though, grazing parkland and integrated into some of our organic arable, which I'll talk about in a minute. Right, there we are, some good heavy tillage. So this is a shakerator down to the frame, which was the way we did things. This was the proven method of growing decent crops for a long time. We used to do a lot of ploughing. We ploughed everything until 2000, more or less, apart from having a Bettinson being sort of no-till enthusiasts briefly in the 80s, which was great with both stubble burning and gramoxone. Much less good when it rained, and you had little furrows filled with water and rotting seed. So that wasn't a great success, and then the plough came back again. So since 2000, we've generally been non-inversion, or almost exclusively non-inversion tillage, so solo and press, and then a variety of other sort of cultivation tools. But the general trend has been wider and shallower, not least because the solo and press is 100 horsepower a metre, and it's very expensive and takes a long time. Most things drill with a tine drill, and we've been direct drilling, or having direct drilling experiments for the last sort of 8 years or so, but very much not a sort of no-till evangelist, which we'll talk about a bit more. But I have actually just bought a plough, which is not something to admit to here, but anyway, there we are. Direct drilling, yes. I had bought a CO4 out of the back of somebody's shed sort of before they were cool, and had converted that with narrow low disturbance points. Had a U reduction in most cases, but crucially not in every case. But I found that in lots of cases, actually, the cost of the cultivations was less than the loss in yield. So not universally great news, but where it worked, and it was great. And it was a question of learning where it worked and how to do it more often. Cover crops. I've grown one good one ever, which was fantastic. A crop of vetch and spring oats, grazed with sheep for 3 weeks in January, grew 6.5 tons of full spec spring barley on 50 kilos of nitrogen after it. Absolutely brilliant. Problem is that's 1 in 8 years. Last year I had a complete shocker and lost 2.5 tons a hectare of spring barley yields, and had to re-drill because of slugs. Me being a bad farmer probably is more to the point, but spring crops, cover crops on heavy ground, for me, is something that I've not by any means cracked. What is the answer if you can't cut wheat before the middle of August? Obviously, cover crop establishment timing and moisture and getting them in early and big enough is a real issue, for us at least. But we'll keep trying. This year, we didn't plant any spring crops. I had a reasonable area of spring linseed to plant. Didn't plant it because obviously horrendous March and April. Came to May, obviously stopped raining. Well, I did put in a little bit just to make sure I'd made the right decision, and it all got eaten by flax flea beetles. So that was the right decision. But we've just planted a sort of summer cover of a mix of things across a reasonably large area. So hopefully that will do well and set us up nicely for hopefully no tilling into that in the autumn. Right, undersowing and living mulches. Not a brilliant success story, but it's been good fun trying. I've sort of slightly given up, not exclusively given up, but I will keep trying. But I don't know if anybody's seen the recent Innovative Farmers report on on living mulches, but a 30% yield reduction is quite hard to live with. So until we crack it, we'll keep doing it at small scale, I guess. So establishment, that's very light tillage, but it works. But what also works is spraying them off by mistake, which I've done a few times. Anyway, the less of that, the better. Right, rotations. Conventionally cut the farm into 4: winter wheat, winter rape, winter wheat, spring beans, always first wheats, and then break crops became difficult to grow. So we're now a bit more flexible, more reactive. Spring oats can work well. Spring linseed, love it, but challenges with establishment. It never pays, but it is the best entry into a direct drill wheat, following it in my view, certainly on our ground. But as I say, not this spring. Rape, I can only grow it on part of the farm now, but this year it looks good. It direct draws well for us. Companion crops generally do have seemed to be a good thing to be doing. They generally yield more than when we don't companion crop them with a sort of straight berseem clover. Spring barley again can do reasonably well, but definitely not direct drilled, and it's a rotational dead end, so it's quite it's a sort of emergency, I guess, for us, but can do well. So where does direct drilling work? For me, it's where the spade says so. I guess it's all about soil conditions on the day or in the days leading up, and also crucially the weather afterwards, because getting water away from the farm or away from the seed is very difficult on heavy ground, and we've had a few disasters. It works well for rape, and it works well for wheat after linseed, but not for spring crops. So wild farmed, we are, and organic. I converted part of the farm to organic starting 2 years ago. We're now approaching harvest with our first organic wheat crop, and we've also got, like Dougal, some wheat and bean bicrop for wild farmed, which has been quite entertaining. That is another good picture of heavy tillage, which was trying to kill a grass and clover ley without ploughing it, and the only winner there was the chiropractor. And that's why I bought a plough. So anyway, on to the next. So organic is only a small part of the farm, but I sort of thought, well, we'll try and make it work before we have to. And I do the spraying, and I don't really enjoy tipping in cans of crystal. And it's been fun. It's, as I say, it's pretty early days. I don't know whether we're going to make any money doing it, but we are at least part of the way down the line, and it's it is good fun. Right. So some lessons. Well sown is half grown, but for us, I think it's more than that. It is you've got to get it right. The seed doesn't really care how you planted it. It just wants good conditions, and it wants the sort of the basics to be right. And learn what works and what doesn't. I've certainly learned what doesn't work, and I'm learning what does. And but it is all good fun. Bad crops and good plants. Yeah, we've all had disasters. Every time you have a disaster, it reminds you how bad it is, because you pay for it in that year, in the following year, in the grain store, and everywhere else. But having good crops and good plants is, I think it's one of the best things you can do for the soil. Now, bicropping. We've got this wheat and bean bicrop this year, and it's noticeable that obviously with a late spring, certainly with the beans compared to my conventional straight beans, we're putting up earlier and better, presumably because of a higher biodiversity, more insects and so on, more pollinators in the mixture than in the straight beans. Proof will be when it comes to harvest, but it was a good start, encouraging start. And it's a bit more about getting the basics right. So the future. As I say, good wheatland, summer cover crops. Well, we're doing that this year. I think there's much benefit to growing them over a poor break crop. Making them pay is a different question. Definitely linseed wherever we can. The summer cover crop that we've put in now is about half spring linseed, so it does great things for us, and we're keen to continue using it. Organic rotation, fairly conventional. It's very early days for us. We're just out of a 2-year grass lay, and on we go with that. We'll see how we go. Wild farmed, a great experience so far. Crops look fantastic. But again, the proof will be when the combine starts rolling. And I think we're always going to strategically till, particularly with organic, but the general trend of being sort of shallower and quicker and less disturbance is definitely one we're going to keep going down. You do need lots of cultivation if you're organic. There's sort of no getting away from that, I think. And that's it. And the only other thing to say, which I haven't really mentioned, is getting livestock back on the farm. As I said, we used to have lots. I'd love to have some again. I think we will. I think the benefits of muck and the benefits of grass in the rotation are, they're blindingly obvious. If you said to our ancestors, well, I've got this great idea of putting some grass and some livestock in and ploughing a load of muck in, and it's all very regenerative, they would sort of laugh at you because that's just good farming.
Well, hopefully that's given you a bit of a flavour of the 3 farming systems. I think the thing that shines out from all 3 presentations is that trying new things is exciting. If you had been at a tent like this at Cereals 15 years ago, there wasn't much to be excited about. So I'd really welcome any questions from the audience. Please say who you are, where you're from, and the more questions, the more trying we want to make our speakers earn their money. So, question at the front, please.
Hi guys, Matt Griffin from Benson Weems Farms in Scotland. Yeah, enjoyed all the presentations. I can't remember who it was, but somebody touched on resilience of soil. And one thing that comes to me from all 3 of you is the resilience of yourselves and the resilience to keep trying and keep going. And if we want to change the industry and get other farmers to jump on this wagon and join us on this journey, what are the key things that are helping you keep going and keep trying and keeping that top paddock in the right place?
Dougal, do you want to have a go at that to start with?
I really enjoy farming in the way that we're going. It makes me feel much better than when you just resort to a can. But it is difficult, and we've heard, we've all had challenges every year. And the main thing is to give it a go. Don't be frightened to do something. Grow a funny crop in half of or quarter of a field, or grow a half a field with a whole load of different crops, or experiment different techniques with tillage. We've been experimenting tillage all our lives, and we've ended up with a direct drill, which we never thought was possible. So I think it's just give it a go. The growing season, I don't know about you, but harvest comes round quicker and quicker every year. And I said to my wife the other day, we're going to have some disasters this harvest, but before we know it, it'll be next harvest. And we will have corrected those disasters, and this harvest will be behind us. Now, obviously, we don't want to go bust, and we've got a rent to pay, and everybody's got every other thing. But if you don't give it a go, you're not going to find the excitement, is what I say.
I just think it's about, I've got to the place where I just didn't enjoy the way we were farming before, and didn't enjoy paying chemical bills, didn't enjoy paying fertilizer bills, and look back and think, well, the soil's a bank, and we've sort of withdrawn out of that bank to allow us to diversify, which we've done successfully, and so now we've got to put back. How do we make it more resilient? But it does become more fun. And then that goes on to Ian's question about some of the team are starting to realise that it is more fun and it is more interesting. And there must be things that we were doing wrong as chemical farmers before, and we're certainly not organic. We're a very long way from organic, and we may never be organic. But just relying on chemical, there must have been things we were doing wrong. Small examples would be, a long time ago we had to do the lee wrap strips around the brooks. We've got 3 major brooks through the property, and we didn't know that we were doing anything wrong at that time. But once we've done that and not farming near the watercourses, suddenly the crayfish are back, the otters are back, and so that tells us that we were doing something wrong. I think taking the team on the journey is I think some people will want to go on that journey, and I think some people may not want to go on that journey. And let's be clear about that. Not everybody wants to do it. But I think it's just more satisfying and rewarding as you can see the soil changing. And for me, it's going back to how the soil was when I was a kid. It was a fungus-rich soil at the time, and it's not yet. So I think it's almost repaying that debt to the soil as well.
Yes, I've got a question over the back, please, Faye. Just while you're getting the microphone there, I'll throw in a curveball. So what changes are there any changes as you're making this transition that what's coming forward with ELMS or SFI that's perhaps changing the direction of travel that you were going to be making?
I think, well, the obvious sort of no insecticide and companion crop, and I suppose the potential for an arable farmer, sort of in the east at least, easy wins, we will continue. But I'm slightly, it's a different point, but I'm slightly nervous that from a policymaker's perspective that we get forced down a route either by carrot or stick that isn't, that is too prescriptive. And that is sort of, particularly for livestock farmers, is much less attractive than for others.
Thank you guys all for your presentations. Just in general, what do you think the benefits are of grazing and finishing stock on the type of land that you're now farming as opposed to finishing them on a more conventional land?
We finish them at 27 to 28 months, so they've hit on the farm for 3 summers. And in both winters, the cattle in the last few years have been outwintered on a mixed cover crop and no other forage, no hay, no nothing. They're just on the cover crop. And they do incredibly well. They're very, very healthy. As my father says, they grow a lovely hairy coat. And if we sent them to market, they'd be up north in a flash because the buyers would just be desperate to buy them. But we like to keep hold of them. And then when we turn them out on the grass in March or April, they grow like stink. And they'll grow at 2 kilograms a day live weight gain, which off grass is amazing, but it's compensatory growth wrapped up in that. So they're doing really well on the cover crops, but the actual finishing is on really good meadow land with no fertilizer.
Just one comment I would add is that where Guy, myself, where we're bringing other people's stock into perhaps grazed covers or so forth, I think cover crops can be quite misleading. They can or deceiving. They can look from the road like there's an enormous canopy and a wonderful amount of dry matter, but actually you get a mob of sheep into them, and there isn't a lot there. A few days later, and you'll find that, So I think if you want to graze covers for stock, you need to think about your planting densities. Stafford.
Thank you. Stafford Proctor from Sutton Bridge, Lincolnshire. Thank you for your amazing stories. A few questions for you all, really. I suppose, Dougal, on the flower-rich grass margins, how do you grow them without the grass weeds sort of taking over? Perhaps it's to do with your lighter soil. And it'd be good to talk a bit more about the cattle poaching and the water freezing over the winter months and that sort of stuff, how you manage that. Slugs, I think, is a big problem for everyone, direct drilling. And perhaps pellets down the coulter is a way, but we need to try and get away from it. I appreciate that. But it'd be good to hear your views. We're also told that the best way to get biology onto the seed is as a seed treatment, and how do we do that on farm if we're sort of Johnson Sue extracting or whatever? How do we successfully do that and have living biology on the seed sort of 3 weeks later when we want to drill it?
Brilliant, thank you, Stafford. Let's start with the slugs. So Julian, you mentioned them, and perhaps Guy, you can comment as well, and then we'll come on to the cattle and the establishing the margins next.
We're trying things in addition to pellets, which we use, and certainly more than we used to. We're trying to deeply annoy the slugs after the combine. We're stubble raking a couple of times. As I was saying, August is typically quite a wet month for us, and so how much desiccation of slug eggs we get is really debatable. Certainly annoys them, and it certainly helps chit any of the grass weeds on the top. So I think it's worth doing in our case. I'd love to get to the stage from a soil point of view where we're not taking any straw off and that we were chopping it all, but we've found that sort of increases our slug numbers. So at the moment we've gone back to selling the straw, which classically I don't really want to do. I'd rather be incorporating it for lots of reasons. I'm trying to get rid of traffic on the soil. It compacts quite easily. The more the other way around, the less machines I can have on there, the better. And so balers and taking all that stuff away gives problems. So I've had to go back to baling using slug pellets and stubble rakes.
I alluded to the sort of cover crop disaster that I had last year. That was almost entirely slug. Well, a combination of slug and bad management that went there. But a thick cover crop, or thickish cover crop, that was, I guess, probably terminated too late, was a sort of heaven for slugs. So that was why we had that disaster. So I think, yeah, reducing rape for reasons other than slug control, but it has definitely helped. But otherwise, I think since we've been on the journey, I know that slugs obviously don't like tillage or cultivation, or any kind of soil movement is the best thing you can do to reduce slug numbers. We have reduced over the years with doing less tillage. Now, whether that's wider rotations, I think it probably is. So yeah, combination of less rape and a wider rotation, I guess.
And Guy, are you growing any AB8 on your stewardship?
Yes, we've got some AB8. We've just started a new stewardship. We've just come out of an HLS where we had some nectar flower mixtures. Relatively small plots. It can become grass dominated very quickly. So that is a challenge, as I think it is for everybody.
So Dougal, you're going to give us the answer how we can grow AB8.
With following wind and a bit of luck. First thing, I mean, it's the same with the slugs, is seed bed. If you're going to sow lots of small seeds, you need a really nice seed bed. You need it to be followed with some, timing with the weather, which is difficult. I've sown them in May, I've sown them in June, because I've known it's going to rain and the soil is just in good condition. And I've sown a lot of them in the autumn, which is probably better. Mowing, and then mow it again with a topper, and probably again. And when you think you're beginning to get a nice lot of flowers coming, and you think, well, we've got to let them flower, it's going to be nice, mow it again. Don't fall for lack of topping. It's what anyone will say. And Marek Kawakowski, or whatever, Marek is the most brilliant man on this subject. He just says, mow it and mow it and mow it in the first year. And sometimes in the second year. And then it has got to be managed, and we have found that mowing and taking the mowings away, making silage or whatever, is crucial in September. But saying that, I've been looking at some margins lately, and some of them where they haven't been mowed for 4 years, I've got the most amazing flowers in, and we've got 6 metre margins with pyramidal orchids in, because they've been in for 15 years. And if that isn't telling you something about how the biology in the soil has changed, I don't know what it's telling you, because an orchid has to have a very specific mycorrhiza to grow and flower. So that's, and we've got clumps of 200 in some margins. It's astounding. But they have got to be managed, because really if you take the grass away, it makes it less dominant, I've found. And you can get trouble with the hedge spreading, and that needs managing as well. Hedge plants, hawthorn and blackthorn spreading into the margin. But it is possible, and obviously source of seed is key. And the more native, the better. And then the other thing was
Poaching,
yeah.
Just before you go on to the poaching, so you are creating a seed bed for your AB. So
Yeah.
AB8 is a floristic margin.
Yeah,
So you're not no-tilling your AB8.
No, I mean we sowed most of our AB8s when they were called something else in the HLS, and we were min-tilling then anyway. But no, I would definitely min-till it. I wouldn't. You're going to spend an absolute fortune on the seed. You've got to have a really good seed bed is key, and probably a sterile seed bed before that is what we did originally, and it worked. And they're the most amazing margins, even if I say it myself. They just make you feel good. Now they're really just coming into their own with lots of lovely flowers. We've had the daisies, and now we've got the knapweed and the lady's bed straw and bird's foot trefoil. And they're just full of life. But the poaching, we've got a conundrum, because we're basically wintering our cattle. I tell my brother that we're wintering them for free, because we were going to grow the cover crops anyway. So we then eat the cover crops carefully, trying to leave as much as we can. And when it pisses with rain, and they've got cattle on there that weigh 500 kilos, they are going to poach it. So do we graze our cattle for nothing and integrate livestock and put all the gut biomes from the cattle into the soil and improve the soil? Or do we ungraze the... when we graze it, we've then got to cultivate it. We can't direct drill after grazing with cattle, even when it's frosty and nice. It just, the top gets packed. And we're really struggling with our spring barley and our spring cultivations. We're working on it. Or do we in winter our cattle, produce a load of more farmyard manure, but first of all we'd have to put a building up in order to house them, and the costs that go with it, and then we need more hay and silage. And at the moment we are taking the poaching, but we're moving them every day, and so one block can be poached, and then tomorrow on our free draining soil with the cover crop it won't be poached, and we've just got to tinker with it to get it right, because we want to see the livestock on the arable land.
Brilliant, thank you, Dougal. Dave, where are you with the microphone? So a question here, and then we've got one in the middle, and then one over here.
Just sort of on the sort of movement towards biofertilizers at the moment, there's quite a lot of talk out there in a lot of different products. Have any of you used any sort of biofertilizers or biological additives on your farm, or like compost tea? And if so, like, have you had any success with them?
I had the worst set of tissue test results I've ever seen on some of my organic wheat this year. So I put some organic approved Citadel on it, which is a sort of molasses-based organic approved foliar feed. I think it probably went a bit greener, but it also rained, which helped. I think that's probably one of the main benefit. On the organic side, or the sort of reducing input side, one of the main attractions is not applying stuff from a can. So that sort of slightly went in the face of that sort of direction of travel. But I think they probably do have a place. I'm no expert on the biological end of life, other than knowing that obviously we need to encourage fungal populations in the soil as opposed to bacterial. So I suppose sort of watching with interest, slightly concerned that of snake oils.
So Dougal, yes, we've got a couple more questions I want to get in, but so briefly, because you've reduced fertiliser by 40%, perhaps you can suggest how.
Yeah, I'm not fully versed on it because I've got a son and brother that do the agronomy, but we are using a product called Nurture N, which I think is a molasses-based product. We're putting that in with virtually every time we go in the field with the sprayer, because it's helping the soil. It'll help break down glyphosate quicker, for instance, not that we use too much glyphosate. And there's various other nutrition-based products that we've been using on our wild farm wheat and some of our other wheats. We wouldn't like to put our hand on our heart and say that they're earning us a fortune, but we believe they're doing the right thing. The science behind it is good. But we're going to try and get into compost, making biologically rich microbial compost. Maybe we'll move on to compost teas, but that's the route we're going down.
Hi, Azeem's from AHDB. 2 quick questions. On the flour-rich margins, have you seen any increase in ergot following the flour-rich margins? And then secondly, I'm not quite versed with wild farmed, but have you found it restrictive at all in terms of how the crop's grown? Have you had to, if you're not wanting to turn the soil and you're restricted on glyphosate, what's the sort of tactic for grass weed control?
Brilliant. Can we do the second part of the question first? So Guy, you're in wild farm, and Dougal, you're as well. So Guy.
Yes, so, I mean, the wild farm standards basically, effectively, it's organic. The only difference being you can apply 40 kilos of soil applied N and up to 40, depending on need of foliar. This is our first year doing it. It's a good question on grassweed and on glyphosate. We'll see, because next year will be the first real test. There's obviously a hard decision to make between whether it's spraying or whether it's tillage. Now, the only option for weed control is tillage. So I guess it's as shallow, or it's as I guess kind of as sympathetic as possible. But in terms of the build-up of grass weeds, we're only in year one, so we'll have to see. But yeah, yes, it is a concern.
Yeah, similar answer from me. I think the great thing with the wild farm for us is that it's giving us a chance to try this method of bicrops and wheat and maybe some other things going forward with the market, so that, you know, hopefully we're going to earn something out of it, or certainly not going to lose money, and we haven't got to go fully organic or anything, which might be something we do one day in the future, who knows. And we're going to have to learn. The one thing, well, for me, I never want to plough any of our farm again. It's just too stony. We've done so much good to the soil, so the plough can never come back in my mind. But min-till, I'm not sure. Min-till isn't better than no-till anyway. I'm not convinced yet, but we've got a no-till drill and it's going very well. So we're just going to have to suck it and see. We've got problem grass weeds like brome and a few wild oats. And on the ergot front, no, I haven't, and I'm touching wood.
Just coming back to you both on the wild farm system, so you're bicropping. How or who or where are you going to separate?
They do promise to pick it up and separate it at the other end. I will have to see. I think a wet harvest with, you know, I know in my case quite a lot of cleavers in there is going to be a big mouldy mess pretty quickly. So we'll probably try and well, I suspect we'll end up trying to separate on farm, either through a pre-cleaner or an older and slower but more sophisticated dresser that we've got on farm, or I guess paying the agri lorry to come in and do the job.
Yeah, we've got an old cleaner in the grain store which we bought some new sieves for, which we are hoping isn't going to involve too much hair loss getting the beans and wheat through it. And if it doesn't work, we're going to we've got the option of a Robin Appel sorting plant. But while touching on the bicrop, our observation of the bicrop so far, which has obviously had no weed killer, is that it's amazing how clean it is in terms of weeds. And we've got a trial going on where we've sown a plot of just wheat and a plot of just beans at the same rate that the rest of the field was sown together, and the beans on its own is full of weeds, unwanted arable plants, mainly groundswell and Phacelia from the cover crop. And it just makes you really think that this bicropping, this mixed cropping diversity, it does have some magic powers. I hate to say it, but I believe it does. In the same way that if you mix blends of wheat varieties, you get no disease.
My question has almost just been answered by Dougal, but I don't know whether I've not been paying attention or off the pace, which wouldn't surprise me. But this is the first Groundswell where I've heard a lot about bicropping. Why is everybody suddenly talking about bicropping? And we've heard some of the advantages from Dougal, but I'd be interested to have an answer to that.
Well, the whole regenerative thing is about diversity, and the more crops you can grow together, the more improvement you're going to get in your soil biology, is the theory behind it, and the interaction between the crops, which we don't really understand anything about in terms of disease and insect control, or the lack of need of it. It's something that you probably want to go and hear Andy Cato talking about it, who is running Wild Farm. Because in a meeting, his dream is for there to be no monocrops. And our experience so far, which is tiny, it's that we have grown a few other bicrop trials in the last few years, but with the beans and wheat, it just does look the right thing to be doing. But the trouble is, with spring crops in a dry year, you're struggling with whatever you're growing on our land.
And just to add to that, I guess it's also with a general trend of reducing synthetic inputs where you can. You obviously you open yourself up to risks that wouldn't otherwise be there, and if you can try and mitigate those through as Dougal says, diversity, then it seems like it's sort of an obvious thing to be doing.
Julian.
And we haven't done any cereal bicrops yet, but I think we possibly will. And why? Just from simply observing what happens when you put things like red clover in with the grass lays, and you're putting a legume in there, and you're automatically reducing inputs. I think what's stopped us so far is just that piece we were talking about a little bit earlier about how do you deal with the end crop. And because I'm quite hands-off, I'm not looking to create extra work, but how far can I get down the journey? But I think bicropping is certainly something that from the grassland side would make a lot of sense to us.
Brilliant. If I can thank you all very much for your questions, and perhaps you can show your appreciation to our speakers. Thank you.